Hello, I'm Catherine Hong Kong.
Hello, I'm Adrian in London.
Right, so Adrian, I have a question to ask you.
Go on.
When you talk about dragon boat racing, what country will you think of, apart from China?
Philippines,
Okay, Singapore,
Thailand,
Hong Kong.
Malaysia.
All right, that's quite a long list there.
We could go forever.
Yeah, that's true. It's such a widespread sport. But there's one country that's undeniably the world power in the sport. And they have proved themselves right over and over again over the years, especially in the very recent World Cup that's held in Nemo, China.
Ripples dance where the sunrise bleeds. Our journey flows where the river leads. Echoes of laughter fill the air. Chatterpot secrets everywhere.
So today, we have the Canadians with us.
The Canadian coaching team is with us today. Matthew Smith and Antony Chandra. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Welcome, welcome. Right, so speaking of Canada being the world power, I've done my little research. Don't mind me if I read it off my screen. So how they dominated the world stage. In the recent World Championship in Thailand 2023, they've won 52 gold medals, 36 silvers, and 13 bronze. That's a lot. And they placed overall third in the recent World Cup. That is crazy. So congratulations, Matt and Tony, and also all Team Canada personnel on your success in the recent World Cup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience in China? So from what we've gathered, the city is where the sport originated. And also, it was where the first World Championship was held in 1995. How does it feel to be in this location that's so significant to the sport?
I think what's special about going to China is how respected the sport is and how well known it is. So we think of dragon boating in the West as a recreational activity. A lot of us do. And then suddenly you go to China and you find out it's as popular as, professional basketball or football. And you have tens of thousands of people attending the event. And you need security just to get through the crowds. It's an entirely different experience for a lot of our athletes. So it's really impressive. The quality of the production is astonishing compared to what we see here. It's the highest possible level, millions of people watching on TV. So as a paddler, it's really the top of what you could possibly want and expect.
Did you really get treated like celebrities, like LeBron or other famous artists and sports people?
It was just to walk to the bus when you left the athletes' village. The number of families, children that were stopping the athletes, asking for an autograph or a photo, it was something else. It was something that people had never experienced before. There was definitely a bit of a celebrity status.
Wow. So by any chance, delayed your departure because of the amount of people asking for pictures and autographs?
It did, yeah. If I recall, one family even handed a baby over. They wanted pictures with the baby. So yeah, no, it made the whole experience really enjoyable for the athletes. The cherry on top.
Tell us a little bit about the venue. How was it like?
The venue, it was on a river, a dam-controlled river. So dragon boating is important enough over there that they will actually close the dams to halt the current in the river for an event. I don't think you'd ever find anyone do that in the West. They had built, by all accounts, a stadium for the event, a massive modern building for all the spectators to watch, huge infrastructure for all the television cameras, and so on. Very, very beautiful when it was all done up. Really spectacular venue.
Mm-hmm. But was it like just dedicated to dragon boating, or was there any other water sports that's being held there?
That's the amazing thing. It's all just for dragon boating. So this is a multi-million-dollar venue that they had built just for dragon boating. It also has a museum on the inside dedicated to dragon boating, and offices for different work that's done around the sport.
Wow, that's impressive.
Tony, am I right in thinking you were there as an athlete for the first World Cup? Is that right?
I was an athlete for the first World Cup.
How's it feel being back?
Surreal. It was I was at the first World Cup and the third World Cup and the last one, which is the fourth. The third and the fourth was as a coach capacity. The first World Cup as an athlete capacity, and the first World Cup, that experience as an athlete is definitely surreal in the sense that you have spectators watching you that you've never had before in your amateur paddling career. And the sheer production of it all, with the TV crews, the security, like Matt said, the directors controlling the schedule, and things that you're just not used to, where you're paddling in the West, or perhaps even somewhere else in the East, because it's not a World Cup level type of competition. So it's definitely a game changer.
I'm really interested in the progress. Have you seen any progress in the sport in that interval between the first World Cup and this year's edition?
There's been a lot. The sport has evolved tremendously, driven again by China. So two things happened in the sport recently that really moved the needle. One was its inclusion in the Asian Games, which is an Olympic property. So once it got an Olympic status, all of the Asian nations, specifically the Southeast Asian nations, started putting some serious money into it. And the other thing that happened was it turned professional in China somewhere around 2011. So the athletes in China are all getting paid an annual salary and training full-time in this sport. So we really noticed the jump around 2015, 16, 2016, especially when suddenly the quality of the athletes and the quality of the production seemed to go to an entirely different level.
Right. So apart from that, there's one thing we noticed that's very different in this World Cup, apart comparing to other championships, for example, the CCWC just now, or the World Championship, is the actual races that they've done. They have the 200 meters, the 500 meters they're very used to, but there's a few that I've never ever seen before. They are a team pursuit, a 1,000 meter team pursuit, and a 400 meter relay, which the team is separated into two boats and to do the race simultaneously. Can you walk us through how does that really work?
Yeah, the relays. So the relay is pretty standard. One team goes, the other team, they get to the end, the other team leaves. That we've seen before. The 1,000 meter team pursuit is pretty unique, and it's something I really enjoy. The goal is to get the men's team and women's team working together and using the wash from the boats to the advantage. So the strategy really is for the men to catch up to the women as quickly as they can, stay on the outside of them, and then both crews adjust their speed so that the women can ride the wake of the men's boat. So it requires a lot of coordination between the two teams, a lot of good fitness and ability, a lot of good work between the helms. So it's an exciting race.
That's really interesting because from my experience of racing in 2Ks, especially like where other boats will surpass you really closely, a wash is never a good thing. That's when we almost capsized in CCWC because of the wash, and it was on a small boat. So like, how does it work? Like making use of the wash?
Yeah, so usually, depending on the size of the boat, the weight of the crew, the speed of the boat, everything will adjust the location of the wash a little bit, but every boat's going to have sort of the wake coming off the bow in a V formation, and you can get on that. It's just like if you're riding a bike and you're drafting behind someone. So the boat that's behind will sit on that wash. It'll pick the stern of the boat up, just like a surfboard, and pull it along. And once you're on that, it can really help a crew, close a big gap in terms of time. So yeah, it takes some skill to practice, but it's something that's really achievable by all crews to do.
Nerd alert, this sounds very similar to what they do in Formula One when they use the slipstream, when they go behind a car in front, and suddenly you find out that you have less resistance and pick up more speed and use it to your advantage. But coming back to the racing, there's one other event that caught my eye, 100-meter race. I mean, I'm a speed, short type of event guy. How is 100 meters? I've never done 100 meters. Must be incredibly intense.
It's a start, I think, and it's spectacular. So they really want, because of the television production, they love these short, speedy distances. They love seeing the stroke rates really, really high, well over 100 into 110, 120, sometimes higher. It's over in the blink of an eye, but it's an exciting race, and it's definitely something the Asian countries love to do, compared to a lot of the Western countries, which have a more balanced kind of racing load. We like to do the 2,000 meters. So over here, you find the 2,000 meters. That's something you don't find being raced in Asia so much outside of the World Championships. They love the 100s. They love the short stuff.
As a paddler who is also a sprint type lover, I can vouch that 100-meter racing is definitely enjoyable, just because it's just short of that lactic threshold before your arms lock up. So you just go all out.
Is it all arms?
So you don't have that last 50 meters when you lift on the 200?
Maybe like 125, 130 when your lactic starts to kick in. And in the World Cup format, they just sometimes, depending on the schedule, they will make you do it 2 times in a row or 3 times in a row.
Wow.
Wow. So you just turn around and go again?
I've had it happen for myself in the first World Cup, where we turned around and did it right away. And then the other time we had to wait about 20 minutes on the water just because of the scheduling. So it just depends on how they run it.
Oh, that sounds intense. Was it hot? Because if it was hot, you'd be cooking on the water for 20 minutes.
Yes. Essentially, we're dousing ourselves with water the whole time, and then drying, and then redousing again. So just pouring water all over our head and body. So.
At least you get a chance to dry up instead of like shivering in the cold water, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like 25-degree plus weather. So.
This brings us swiftly to my next question, because we were talking about extremely high stroke rates for the 100 meters, but then, of course, you have the longer races, 2K. How do you find the optimal stroke for your team? What do you find the sweet spot? Because every team is different. Chinese have a different style. The Westerns, the Canadians have a different style. How do you find the sweet spot?
That's the million-dollar question, finding the right stroke rate. As the sport evolves, though, those stroke rates are starting to meet closer and closer in the middle. There was a long time where Western countries would, stroke a 500 under 80 or even under 70 strokes a minute. Meanwhile, the Asian countries are doing everything over 100 strokes a minute. On the 200 and 500 meters, the stroke rates now are very similar. You'll see both Western and the Asian countries, Canada, I should say, around 90 strokes a minute for a 500 meter. On a 200 meter, slightly over 100, but not 120 like it used to be. The biggest difference you see is in the style of the stroke. So you'll see the Asians are much, much, much more aggressive in hitting the catch in the front of the stroke, whereas the Western styles are a lot more rotational based and a lot more about pushing the stroke back in the second half. So those are some of the differences you see.
Well, that is one question I haven't. It's been mind-boggling for me, given the fact that I just moved from London to Hong Kong. So I've always been, I think in the UK, our stroke is quite similar, as in we emphasis on a lot more rotation, a longer stroke. And I moved to Hong Kong, I was told like, nah, we don't want that. That is just not what we want. It's not efficient. So very heavy catch, much shorter stroke. And we've asked a lot of people on that, like, how does it make a difference? Like, what's the, what makes them have this different stroke style? What is the advantage in each style?
So that heavier catch, and it's not just about hitting the water hard, it's also the depth that they go with their catch. They really reach down, a good 6 inches under the surface to grab the more resistive water. It helps them sprint a lot more because they're going and looking out for a lot more resistance. On the other side, a stroke that's more rotational based, more like an outrigger stroke, is going to be preferable over a long distance. So you see countries like the United States doing really, really well on the 1,000 meter and the 2,000 meter, and they've got a strong influence coming from the outrigger paddling community. So two different styles that lend themselves to do different kind of situations.
But when you put together a team, say the Canada Premier team, do you adjust your stroke style and rate according to the athletes you have? Or is that something that you will tell your athletes, you have to do this?
I'd say it's a negotiation. You try and impose a style and a plan, but ultimately you're limited by what your athletes can do. So in Canada, we try and take those elements of the Asian sprinting, that heavy catch going down deep for when we do our 100s, 200s. There's a lot more hinge in that stroke too. And then on the longer distances, we'll look to, say, the Americans and their style, and say, what can we learn from that? And that's going to have more rotation, more leg, more hip work, more emphasis on different things. So we start with that, and then the athletes do those things. And if we're able to get 20 athletes to do all those things, then we stick with it. If we find we're struggling, then we might dial it back and try and adapt to our athletes a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I can see from the World Cup, because they have this stroke camera just right in front of the paces. And one thing I've noticed is there's a lot of hinge in the Canadian stroke, and which we don't really emphasize on that in the UK.
And it's interesting you say that, because we find we don't hinge very much compared to the Asians at all. So one of the analogies I use with my paddlers is imagine an Olympic weightlifter who's lifting that weight up over their head. If you were to do that same movement, but completely remove your hips in a hinge setting from that. I mean, that's where the entire initial burst of energy comes from, the legs and the hips. If you remove that from your stroke, then you're really denying yourself of a lot of power, especially for those sprints and those starts. So that's something we're trying to integrate a lot more here, and it's easier to do with the on a slower stroke rate. And what the Asians are so good at through repetition and volume of training is being able to incorporate that big, massive movement on their sprints. So they're getting that. Whereas a lot of us in the West on the sprints are very static with our hinge, relying on our shoulders.
Right. Speaking of training, you just said, there's one thing that we find really interesting about the Canadians. We get a very cold winter in the UK as well.
Not as cold as Canada, though.
No, not nearly as cold. Been complaining like, oh, it's so cold. We don't want to go paddle. We can't do anything. Let's just do this once a week. But clearly the Canadians have found a way to do it. So we've seen on social media mainly, there's a lot of indoors training, especially your lakes and rivers do get frozen. We've seen paddle ag, which I think it's quite evident what it's used for. But pool paddling, we haven't seen that at all in the UK. Can you explain what does it do, like with pool paddling?
Sure. Well, first of all, Tony and I live in very different situations. So if you're from the West, the West doesn't freeze over the way it does in the East. They can paddle all year. But in the East, our season, I should say our comfortable season runs from May, the beginning of May through mid-October. You can usually add about 3 weeks on to each end of that, where you're dressed up in some warm weather clothing. We use the paddling tank as a way of teaching movements and practicing technique. So it's just channels of water where we can sit, we can practice synchronization, the technique. We can do different drills. And but the main focus for Canadians in the winter is actually just physical training, getting to the gym, hitting the weights, doing the pull-ups, getting really strong, getting really fit. And then the technical work we do in the pool is secondary. So we don't try and do it hard. We're not trying to win. We're just trying to learn and perfect our technique. And I find having that break really helps. It lets the athletes reset than if they were just paddling 12 months a year. So here it stops. They think of something else. The pressure goes off the paddling. They can just think of the technique and not have to worry about getting ready for a race. So we've found it effective, but I have to say I am pretty jealous of Tony and what I think you guys paddle all year, right, Tony?
Yeah, we paddle pretty much all year, short of certain weather that's a little bit colder, which is like, past -2, -3, somewhere around there. Typically, it is a little bit different in the sense that we can go out all year. Of course, with that, in the winter, we change our programming. We go towards the goal of training our aerobic capacity and then trying to maximize that, trying to get as much mileage as we can to prep our body for our specific preparation phases. The one thing I would say, I am also jealous of Matt's side of it sometimes when I see them paddling in the warm weather inside and wearing t-shirts and shorts, whereas if we were to paddle out here in the winter, some people like to wear neoprene gloves or socks, super thick clothing, but I always found that once you start going, you're really hot. Like any kind of jackets or anything like that will just trap water and just get you really hot. But I would say that a lot of the training itself involves the mental fortitude in paddling all year round in the winter, because you're really uncomfortable, you're wet, you're cold, you just don't want to be there, but you know that you have a specific goal in mind that you're training. And if you don't give it all, you're just wasting your time in the water, just garbage miles. But essentially, the training for the western part of the country, specifically in my region, is to try and get as much mileage as possible to get the endurance, the aerobic base set, so that when you do focus on getting specific distance training, that you have the base ability to support that, similar to what Matt was saying. In the gym, you got to get stronger so that you can use that strength to properly hone in on what you're trying to achieve.
So you're saying in the winter, the focus would be a lot on base training, because that's
Yes.
something we've observed very similarly in our experience in Hong Kong, and Adrian's recently went to Singapore. They did that. This is their off season as well. They focus a lot on base training, and in the UK we don't do as much of.
As people say, the gold medal is earned in the winter. So it's what you put in the winter behind the scenes when people don't see, when it's dark or rainy or stormy and it's cold and uncomfortable. There's no acknowledgement of what your hard work is. It's you yourself that has to hold yourself accountable. And if you don't put that work in, someone else in a warmer part of the country or warmer part of the world will work as hard or harder than you and get ahead of you. That's it. And there's no one else to blame but yourself.
Speaking of hard work, I can never cease to be amazed by how much work your athletes put in the gym. Literally, their social media is littered with their lifts, their personal bests, and everything else. How do you get them to commit to that kind of level?
Gym training is a bit like a drug. I think they once you start doing it, you don't want to stop, and they quickly find a way to build it into their lives, even at the highest level. As a coach, one of the expressions we have in coaching is you want to coach the person before the athlete, and I always try and remind them that this. As much as you're doing, this is a part of your life. It can't be your whole life. And it should only dominate your life, for a few weeks when we really got to get ready. But most of the year, you got to find a routine you're happy with. And if you really look at the training, it's not so much the volume they do, it's how effective they are with the time they spend in the gym. 45 minutes to someone who's inexperienced in the gym and 45 minutes to an athlete that really knows what they're doing, they get so much more quality into their workout. And 45 minutes to an hour of physical activity a day is something we should almost all really be doing. So I would say the at the end of the day, it's not so much the time, it's the quality that they put in that really makes a difference.
How are they looking geographically? Are they many of them from the same region, or are they spread across the country? I'm thinking when you do a training with a couple of friends, it goes so well because you motivate each other. But when you're on your own in the gym, it's a completely different game.
Definitely. Canada is a big place. Our national team kind of follows along the geographical population. So most of our athletes come from Toronto, then Montreal, then Vancouver, and then from some of the outlying areas. So a lot of these athletes have networks to train with. The ones who are outside, of the big cities. These are a special group of people who find that motivation to do it on their own.
And part of one issue that I do see with athletes in terms of gym training, it can be a double-edged sword in the sense that if they really go at it, they have the commitment and drive to perform and train hard. The other spectrum of that is sometimes depending on the athlete maturity or how experienced they are, they don't know how to control themselves because their goal is not just paddling specific. They just want to get strong and better PRs, better whatever. And at the end of it, they might not think that they might not do the best for paddling. They just want to get strong and big, which, as Matt would like, we don't want overly big athletes. We want you to be strong. We want you to be lean and strong, like, power to weight ratio. But sometimes they just want to be big and strong because it looks cool. But it might not be the best goal.
Speaking of the size of athletes, you just said you guys don't want them to be big and strong. But from what I've seen, when I see the Canadians, we were amazed by the mere size. The size of a Canadian lady is the size of a British male paddler. And our jaw just dropped to the floor. And how, I don't...
Yeah, there's... So with the women and men are very different goals when it comes to the physical part of the training. With the women, I get as strong as you want and keep getting strong. And this is a power sport, and in a lot of ways, I find the boat isn't even properly designed for women. Like, it's too heavy for women. Whereas the weight ratio for men seems to work out. And women's crews that succeed are women's crews that are really physically strong. And I haven't seen an upper threshold to saying that's too much strength and that's too much weight and so on. With the men, on the other hand, yes, there's definitely such a thing as too much bench press. You don't need it. And the men's crews can get quickly too heavy. So what is the magic perfect balance for a men's crew? Who knows? That's another $1 million question. But you don't want too many guys, over 200 pounds in the boat. A lot of the Asian crews, probably around 78, 80 kilos. So around 180 pounds seems to be the sweet spot for them. That's the target I've put out for our crew. Very lean guys. The other challenge with their sport is it requires deep water to go fast. And a lot of the race courses we use, which are artificially or man-made, are shallow, too shallow for a dragon boat. 3-4 meters. You want 5-6 meters plus to be going fast. So that's another consideration with the men. So yeah, be strong, but it's that pound per pound strength and that crazy amount of cardio too. You need to back it all up.
Just speaking, this one thing that really caught my attention and what you just said. You said the boats are not really built for women. And I'm aware that the IDBF recently is recruiting for a chair for the Women's Commission. So with that, do you think we will get specific boats for girls?
No, I don't think so. I think that would. I didn't consider any kind of long-term ramifications of me saying that. But I think if someone makes a lighter boat, then everyone's going to want a lighter boat. So I don't know if I ever see the boat, the sport being having a different boat for the men or women. But that would be interesting to maybe discuss or look at further.
Speaking of a lighter boat, because we spoke recently to Gary Millward, who is the head coach of GB Senior A, and he is very strict about what his athletes wear in the boat, to the point where he would weigh his trainers soaked in water and the clothes and just put a limit on what sort of weight. Do you go to the sort of extremes to keep the weight of your boats under control?
I don't think we've ever done that, Tony. The only rule is empty your water bottle before the race. Don't bring any extra stuff in there. But I think the athletes are smart enough to stay light. They want to, they got their racing shorts and their shirt. Usually one or two of them will have a little water bottle and then they share it before the race. They dump the rest.
I think back then, depending on the coaches of the years, there might have been some where the restrictions they have is, okay, everybody wear caps or everybody don't wear caps, or everybody wears short sleeve only, or the whole boat must wear tank tops only. But other than that, nothing in terms of weight. Like Matt said, water bottles, keep it to a logical minimum number. Obviously, you don't need everybody to bring one. So it's just straightforward, I would say.
Well, I remember Adrian had a question to Gary when we were speaking to him on the weight thing. He asked if he prefers bald guys on the boat. What's your take on that, Matt?
I think I know what the answer is for this, but yeah,
of course it makes sense, yeah.
But guys, culturally, here in the UK, we have a joke, sort of half joke. When we look at Canadians and asking why are they so good, The immediate answer that comes from certain quarters is, well, the Canadians, of course, they were born with a paddle in their hand. How important is a cultural background to the prowess of the Canadian team in Dragon Boat?
There's nothing we're doing in Canada that no other country could do. In fact, I think it would be easier to run a national team in a more densely populated, smaller country. We look at Europe with envy, where because our national team gets to actually only trains together 2 or 3 days before the championship. That's the only time we get together. So if we were in a smaller area where we could get together a lot more often, that would be really beneficial. I think the biggest difference really is just in the probably the experience in the coaching. So in Canada has a very two things that worked well in Canada. One was the Asian population, of course, brought the sport. So through Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, it's spread everywhere through the different Asian communities. So that introduced it to a lot of people. The flatwater canoeing community got involved early on, and they were the first generation of coaches and shared a lot of their knowledge. Nowadays, it's almost entirely a dragon boat group that runs dragon boating. But that was the head start, if you will, is coming out of the gates with a lot of marketing being done, getting people involved in the sport from the cultural groups, and then that first generation of coaches that gave good advice.
I probably have 3 things to add to that. One is that I think, to echo what Matt said, coaching, I think our club crews are really, really good, which lends itself to the base of our national team athlete, just because everybody knows that if you train together for a number of months in the season, that you would be better, obviously, just straight off the fact. Unfortunately, like Matt said, in national team, we only meet 2 to 3 days prior. So I think the base of having that experience and paddling strength from our clubs have lent to the success of the Canadian teams. Secondly, I would say that I echo Matt's point of view of envious to the European communities, because it's such a short drive or method to get together and train, at least 2-3 times a year. That'd be great. If we could do that here, that'd be awesome, but no. And thirdly, funny you mentioned about the born with a paddle in the hand. I remember specifically going to this last World Cup that I just remembered how many people are so exposed to the sport that I just think to myself, like, is this one of the most basic sport they have in China? Like, does every kid, come in school and they're like, oh, you have a dragon boating class or some sort of physical activity course that has paddling in mind, and because it's how good they are. So that's a funny question you asked. So just to relate to that.
I might be able to answer Tony's questions because I recently moved here. When I told my colleagues that, I do dragon boating, I was like, I just went to the World Championship, and then thinking it's cooler than it actually is, on my note. And they were like, oh, I thought it only happens when it's during the Dragon Boat Festival. That was most people's view on that, actually. Most people think it only happens during like that specific time of the year. And I was like, no, it's actually quite big. And then they're like, oh, are the teams all like Chinese or Taiwanese or Thai or, East Asians? I was like, no, actually one of the best teams are Canadians, the Western, USA, Aussies. They're everywhere. And everyone seemed to be shocked to hear this. And it's so weird because they are people that was born and raised in Hong Kong, and they are so familiar with the sport. At the same time, they're so not exposed to it, if that makes sense.
The global, the international side of it, yeah.
Yeah. And you guys did mention about the geographic challenge. That's one thing Adrian and I used to complain a lot to each other doing the GB camp, like training squad and the campaigns. because I think it's every 3 weeks just for the training squad. It's every 3 weeks, and then it's over a span of 3 months. So you meet each other for 4 times, and we have to travel on the train for 2 hours. And we're like, oh, this is so far away. We don't want to travel that far. And then you will hear people from like ex-GB team members, they will be saying, oh yeah, there's a lot of commitment when you go there. You have to travel every 3 weeks.
All the way from London to Liverpool, 2 hours on the train. Awful.
Yeah. So
Sounds very
right. Exactly. Like we're talking, how long does it take to drive from where Matt is to where Tony is?
2.5 days, 3 days. Actually, maybe 4.
It's about 50, or sorry, it's close to 60 hours to drive from Montreal to Vancouver.
So it's 3 to 4 days without sleeping.
Yeah. So you could just do.
Prefer flying. More money, but definitely shorter, like about 5-hour flights. So because if you think about it, 5 hours from Montreal to Vancouver, that's not super long, but 5 hours in Europe, you get pretty far.
Wait, but 5 hours on a flight?
Yes, not driving, flight. So your 2-hour train ride, I would take any day on I'm assuming high-speed train, but still.
The general high speed.
Okay, it's sub-speed train with still better legroom than economy flights, I would say.
Yes, that is true.
I think though that most Canadians would be envious of only having to do that for a national team camp, and that speaks to just creating a program that people believe in and want to buy into, and we. Again, Canada, whatever I'm not sure what the perceptions are outside of Canada, but there's really 6 or 8 very big, prolific clubs that generate a lot of the paddlers, and each of the national teams has from that about 100 to 150 people trying out for each of the national teams, and it's a big honor to do that. It's a big goal, and that's that's the kind of thing I think when I said what we do in Canada could be built anywhere. It's just about creating a process that people buy into and treating the athletes with integrity and professionalism, and eventually your program starts to get a little bit bigger. And that 2-hour train ride goes from being a drag to, I can't wait to get there and be surrounded by these other amazing athletes. So yeah.
Dragon boat is actually quite popular in Canada. So like, how do you get like young people, especially to get into the sport?
I wouldn't say that. Maybe more so in the eastern side of the country. Just because they have a stronger college circuit, U24 circuits, or 24U circuits, not so much in the West. But I think most teams, if you ask in Canada, recruiting is always an issue every single year. So I think exposure-wise, probably not as good as some other countries, I would assume. But I don't know, your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I think I would disagree a little bit when you say recruiting is an issue. I think recruiting the quality paddlers we want is always an issue, but recruiting someone who's willing to pick up the paddle is rarely the problem.
Yeah.
But getting youth involved. So now, at my club is called 22 Dragons, and we have a ton of youth at the club. And we've worked for it. We've gone out to the universities and schools and said, start up a dragon boat program. Didn't always work. And then we learned how to make those programs work. Rule number 1 with youth is making sure that you've got youth coaching youth. Too often kids show up and then some 50-year-old, guy tries to show them how to do it. It's not fun. So you've got to make the programs that are friendly. Adults don't really we think we might be good at it. We're not the ones to be doing it. So we've had a tremendous success getting the schools involved just by running a quality program. One school alone, a college nearby here, had over 300 kids sign up for the Dragon Boat program.
Wow.
And they accepted. They ended up accepting 95 into the program. That's one school. So yeah, when it's just a question of marketing, and being a little entrepreneurial about how you go about attracting people into the sport.
Yeah, part of the obstacle on the western side of things, especially Vancouver, is that the weather is so good that, I mean, at least not winter all the time, in terms of actual weather, is that there's too many things to choose from. There's cycling, volleyball, dodgeball, even skiing if you want to, skiing, snowboarding. And then, you can go up skiing, snowboarding in the morning in the mountains and come back down and just, paddle if you want. But most people don't like to be wet, especially Vancouver being a wet city. It's a little more difficult. So
I wanted to ask, what's the situation with funding in Canada? Is there any funding for the sport from Sport Canada or something similar?
Nothing.
None at all.
zero.
So, and I'll tell you, the biggest badge of honor to every Canadian national team paddler isn't necessarily that they're third or World Cup or they win a gold or silver medal at the World Championships. Is that when they do it against Team China or Indonesia or someone, they not only are they not professionals, the Canadians, they've paid $3,000 a piece to go on this trip, and it's a real moment.
That's probably the low end on the whole process itself. Flights and jerseys and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you said there's 100 athletes trying for each team, respect. I mean, at that kind of level, I don't think it's surprising that you can find the quality athletes that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think the club establishment in Canada is very different from what we have in the UK. So in the UK, so from what I've gathered from social media, once again, you have recreational clubs and you have competitive clubs. So most of the clubs that we've heard of, for example, 22 Dragons, or I don't know, HG, it's American, or as
H2O is Canadian, yeah.
It's Canadian, and then NDPR or something like that. They're all competitive clubs, but there are a hierarchy of clubs, from what I've understood. If I'm correct.
So the club system. So Canada's done a few things right in this. They're not too strict on what a club looks like. So a club. We're all very familiar with a club having a clubhouse and a board of directors and statutes and bylaws and all this stuff. And if you start to put too many rules on that club, it gets hard for them to do it. In Canada, you're a group of 20 people. We don't care how you're constituted. You get to be a club. That's it. We did that on purpose because there's no funding. There's no government funding anywhere. So if you have an entrepreneurial idea on how this should be done, go about it. And a lot of the clubs are a mixture of both nonprofit and say for-profit. So those clubs you named, 22 Dragons and H2O Playground, they're very competitive clubs. And run like your classic nonprofit club. But underneath all these programs that they have, these Learn to Dragon Boat community programs, they've set those up so that people off the street can walk in, no hassle whatsoever, pay their $150, get their 10 weeks, learn how to dragon boat with a certified coach. No hassle. It's just, it's easy for them to do. And it works like magic because of all those community programs and recreational programs. Those paddlers who get the bug end up going to the competitive club. So every competitive club kind of has an umbrella underneath it of different things. Or I should say is an umbrella for things that are underneath it. And that's one of the keys to success for a lot of the big Canadian clubs.
Oh, speaking of going back to clubs, so it's very localized. So from what we gathered, it's when you've trained together all the time, it's easier to develop your team synchrony and hence the success in the club. You have the same people sitting on the same bench every single week, day in, day out. However, like we said earlier, Canada's such a big country. You only get together 2 or 3 days before the championship or the race. How do you manage outside of that then? Like, what are you going to do for those that's living in, I don't know, Vancouver and Montreal? How do you coach them?
Nowadays, it's quite easy, actually, because of all the video technology we can share. So for the athletes that are in the big cities, they can get a lot of the quality training they need with their clubs. They get goals from the national team coaching staff, work on this, because every club has its own style. The ones in the smaller regions, it's more of a challenge because they don't have the same level of club to train with. So they're always rating at, stroke rates that are 10 to 15 kind of ticks lower than the high level clubs. You get them their goals, they get their training in. Then when we get together, we spend some time blending. We've got a few tricks, a few coaching cues we have to make sure that to realign people mentally as to what we have to do when we get in the boat. And then as coaches, we always have to be flexible in our expectations. So we've given them all these goals, but when they get in the boat, ultimately, we've got to get them in and out at the same time. And we only go so far in trying to correct their individual technique. Because after a while, it just becomes imitation of a movement versus an effective technical movement they have. And I think all of that is just some experience running the program for a while. But it seems to work, but if you break it right down, you'll see a lot more homogeneity in the Asian crews than you'll see in the Western crews. That's for sure.
I think that's also because in some Asian nations, the club that wins the national league effectively becomes a national team.
Yeah, that's true and very much true in China. So China has their professional clubs that work that way. Thailand and Indonesia and Myanmar, they're all a little bit different. They're all government-run national team centers where the athletes live and train together 24/7. 10 months a year kind of thing. So they're very different. And that's all because of the Asian Games participation.
So you brought up the Asian game. That leads us to the very, very ultimate question for the sport. So we all know, but Asian game is managed by the IOC. It's managed, whatever. But basically, it's under the umbrella of IOC. It's basically like the European Games we have in Europe. So I think Dragon has been on the Asian Games for a few times, at least 2 times that I can think at the top of my head. And it has been a demonstration sport in Tokyo Olympics and Paris Olympics. How can we take this forward? How can we make this an Olympic sport?
So this is a whole other discussion.
A whole other podcast. How was that?
So clarifications. So the Asian Games are run under the authority of the Asian Olympic Committee, which is actually a branch of the IOC. And that started in 2010, that they've been doing those every 4 years. So the sport was actually not a demonstration sport in Tokyo or in Paris. So a clever play on words by the ICF, the International Canoe Federation, who we may have heard of, has been trying to step into our sport for some time. There's a big difference between a demonstration sport, which doesn't exist. They haven't had demonstration sports since the 1990s, where they would bring sports in and give out Olympic medals. What they did do in Tokyo and Paris is they demonstrated the sport by having a group of people get in dragon boats off site, off the venue, paddle onto the race course, put on a little show for the spectators, and then leave. No medals awarded or anything else. So a very clever spin on things by the International Canoe Federation. The challenge with the Olympics is the number of athletes. So we've seen all around how they're just closing down. And if you look at sports like rowing or synchronized swimming, it's teams of 8. And in rowing, with teams of 8, they might only invite 6, 8, 10 crews maybe at most. Or rugby, it's not the 15s, it's the 7s. So the challenge in dragon boating is, how do you control that? The number of athletes. It's probably not going to be a 20-person boat. Will it be a 10? Will it be 8 or 6 even, if it happens? And then how many countries even get to take part when it does happen? So the real benefit of the Olympics is actually not so much that we see it on television, which is what all the people I don't want to see, but the real benefit to the sport is once you have IOC recognition, your government starts to take you seriously. And that opens doors in a lot of countries for coaching education, for subsidizing athletes and so on. So that's the real benefit. Will it happen in our lifetimes? Who knows? Who knows? It's Asian Games happen. It's going to be in the World Games in Chengdu in next year. That's going to be an 8-person boat, 8 countries only taking part, and but not in Paris. It's certainly not going to be in LA. If it is, it's going to be demonstrated, not a demonstration sport. I'm not sure about Australia in 2032.
Before we let you go, we have our little segments we would like you to participate in. Have Matt, you seen the video Adrian sent you earlier today?
I had a quick look at it, yeah.
I apologize in advance.
So if you can give Adrian a little pointer on how he can do a little better.
Yeah. So the big thing in looking at that video, I would absolutely get the crew leaning into it a lot more. I noticed the arms pulling back a bit. A lot of the stroke happening a little too close to the body. So definitely stretching a lot further out with that bottom arm, getting the lat. The lat muscle is a lot stronger once it gets stretched out. So stretching out, leaning down, and opening up, getting much bigger. So a lot of the, 99% of dragon boaters who are not on national teams will be paddling at a much lower stroke rate and would just benefit by having a really big stroke. So the national teams will get particular about paring down a catch or an exit, but so definitely leaning forward, stretching out that bottom arm as much as you can, being careful not to overstretch in the air, doing a lot of the stretch into the water, the point of maximum extension being in the water, not in the air. So some of that. And then, of course, working on the posture, especially for men, having strong posture. A lot of guys over 40, I'm not going to guess anyone's age, but guys over 40 tend to slouch a lot. So being very upright, being able to hinge forward through the hips versus rounding the lower back to lean. always staying forward and tight. All those things really help the glide of the boat. So yeah, there's a few tips in there in that video. But I think looking at that video, simply by opening up and getting bid, that same crew can be going 4 to 5 seconds faster in from one practice to the next, simply by getting a lot bigger.
What's
Much
fun?
appreciated.
Lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring
it to your coaches, Adrian.
Absolutely. That will be on the next training session early in January.
Yeah. So
Do it very gently.
Yeah. After all the eating over the festive period. And our final segment, Kath, if you want to do the honors.
yes. So this is a little segment. We call it Pass the Paddle. So basically how it works, it's each guest or each pair of guests will leave a question for the next guest to answer without knowing who they are. So the person who left the last question was Gary Millwood, who's the Senior A coach of Team GB. So he has this obsession of making the boat faster, as we discussed earlier. He will weigh his shoes and all that. So it'd come down to a conclusion, knowing that you guys go, well, he doesn't know it was you, but his question was,
do they wear Speedos?
do you guys wear speedos when you race?
Speedos?
See that.
I mean, it may be inside our athletes' clothing, but we probably shouldn't find out the no.
Well, we'll have to get that back to Gary to not go to those extents to make his boat go faster.
Yes.
Yeah, no, you know, I don't think a Speedo, the amount of friction between the athlete rubbing with the seat, I don't think it's something someone wants to play with. Yeah. Especially a heavier guy would wear through that thing pretty quick.
Although there's one thing you could possibly try, aerodynamic-wise, up top, perhaps it could be a trial period where everybody who's not a female to try and taper it down.
I'm sure like.
And now that means it's your turn to leave a question for the next guest on the podcast.
So I would love to know what every team's strategy is off the start line, because that's what we're always looking for is more speed, and that speed you're only as fast as your start. That's your top speed. So I'd love to know what every team on the planet, what their strategy is off that start line. You got one, Tony?
Yeah, not quite as specific as that. Well, I mean, maybe. I would say the question is, what is the one simplest thing to do to bump a recreational team up a division or two?
Wow. They're difficult questions. Good luck to the next one.
Yes.
Well, the answer should be pretty straightforward, I would think, in my opinion, but maybe there's a little variances in the answer. But yeah.
Right. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for your time. It's quite a long one.
Really, really
actually.
appreciate it. It's been so enjoyable, and we've learned some new things as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us here.
Speak again in the
Massive
future.
pleasure.
All right.
Yes. See you very soon.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Dance where the
Bye-bye.
sunrise bleeds. Our journey flows where the river leads. Echoes of laughter fill the air. Chatterbox secrets everywhere.